Here at Kind Community, and this is the Kind Community Show, where we share stories of founders, activists, and influencers promoting positivity and protection of our planet, discussing how collaboration can help make the sustainable, attainable, and accessible for all. On today's episode, we have Dominique Sinagra, founder of The Village Charity and Journey to the Village, the beginning of what aspires to become a global community built on human potential, hope, and kindness, all modeled off village commonalities. We'll be speaking today about the formation of this charity and social enterprise, its relationship to sustainability of people, and some of Dominique's personal stories as a female founder. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dominique. It's so nice to have you on our show.
Thank you for having me.
So just to start off, it would be really great to understand a little bit more about your background. Is there one or even maybe a couple of motivating principles that you've learned and carried with you throughout your journey?
Yeah, so I've been on a really unique trajectory. I left high school at 16, and I've sort of been traveling and being out in the world ever since then. I have a background in the arts as well as a pretty extensive humanitarian background where I spent many, many years working in different humanitarian capacities and interviewing people, listening to people's stories. And really, I would say the crux of all my work has been the exploration of what connects us and what it is in people's stories. What are the universal themes in people's stories that reach across social and political and cultural boundaries? And that might seem like a really vast and broad sort of course of study, but I really, really believe that nothing changes until the stories that we tell about a thing, a person, a culture, a being, the land, nature, whatever it might be, nothing changes until the stories that we tell about something changes. And so in order to really sustainably and meaningfully bring about change and respectfully bring about change, we need to start from a place of understanding and a place of recognizing the universality of our stories and frankly the humanity in other people. I've seen, it's so it's so easy for something as key and as sort of a given of someone's humanity to be lost in the things that are different from us. Mm-hmm. And so really deeply the common theme in my work and my vision is connecting people in a meaningful way and exploring and emphasizing what it is that we all share.
I think that's beautiful because I think just kind of I'm maybe simplifying this massively, but just in terms of like meaningful connections, I think it's so easy to have lost that in the kind of the way that we live our lives currently with social media and everything else. And for myself, I've been reflecting on even like going to events and having the first question being asked, like, what do you do? And I always found that question very interesting because I love what I do, but should that really define who I am and, my story? And I don't think that we really ask enough questions to people to really understand who they are as people. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think social media, I've been reflecting a lot on it as well and preparing for this conversation. And obviously in some capacity is this, here we are doing a social media event. And, obviously in so many capacities, it's this profound connector where it allows us to connect with people in a way that was so literally impossible very short time ago. Equally, and I think to your point, it can promote this sort of false humanity or this false intimacy and also a false sense of self and therefore a false sense of the other. And I think we can have a long conversation about the pros and cons of social media, but I think in terms of storytelling, those facets are really, really important. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And for those of who may not be acquainted with the Village Charity, can you give us a bit of background as to what it is, why you founded it, and how it works?
Yeah. So it was founded about coming up to 4 years ago now, so relatively recently. And it really came out of, the explorations that I just talked about, and an awareness that in the NGO landscape and in the charitable landscape that I'm aware of, there wasn't really any entity that was working from a holistic point of view, from a whole person, whole community point of view. And that really what I saw in my experience was, of course, many excellent organizations working on one or two specific things, and oftentimes doing them really well. But what I saw happening in my conversations I was having with people and my observations was that, for instance, there would be instances where a child or a person or a family couldn't take advantage of whatever this organization was offering. And that could have been for many, many reasons. It could have been, it's an educational charity and the child goes home and doesn't have any food, or lives in a amongst domestic violence, or whatever it might be. And then in some ways it became that the child or the family were to blame for not being able to take advantage of these opportunities. And of course, we're all carrying with us traumas and challenges that are, you know, multi-layered and complex. And again, it comes about this idea of real sustainable change having to come from a really deep sort of story-based place first, and an understanding and a listening. And it has to be holistic, and it has to be multifaceted, and it has to be long-term, and it has to be founded in a conversation with local people, local partners, local voices, wherever that might be. So the village really came out of an inspiration of how can we work with a community over the long term, adapting to what they feel they need, where the gaps are in their community, and how we can address the fact that a well-rounded, successful individual who is fully integrated, there's many pieces to that. Mm-hmm. And therefore it takes many approaches. So the village really works within, and we can talk about it more within this concept. Do you want me to go into the pillars now?
Yeah, sure. It was going to lead into my next question. So perfect.
The village works with this idea that I came to in collaboration with my partners, was this idea of a sort of the universal concept of a village. And if you look at, and I'm saying these terms sort of archetypically, but most villages have some space of storytelling, which we call the theater. Most villages have a school, some relationship with nature, which we call the garden, some space that addresses the less tangible parts of life, which we call the sacred space, some space around market, of enterprise, of ideas, of commerce. And then there's the really basic needs of a human experience, which is the home, which is food and shelter and being safe. And if eventually a place can have all of those aspects, then that's a pretty successful foundation for our human life. Of course, what happens is not all places have all those aspects. And where we come in is we can work intimately with a community and looking at where those gaps are and how we might fill them. And of course, I think what I found really exciting about working in this way is we sort of straddle this space of being universal, which therefore allows us to be completely specific to what the information that we're getting, and adaptive, and adaptive over time too. It's not a one size fits all, yet we're pulling from a sort of universal toolbox. And so, for instance, a community might have a school, a market, and a garden, but they don't have a sacred space. And so we can start to sort of bring what we have and the partnerships that we build in an area to the community. Or there's an instance where it really is a space that, or a demographic that kind of needs all six. And then you work over time and with partners to facilitate that.
I think that's brilliant. And for these six aspects of a village, how did you come up with them? Was it just through conversations? Was it, how did you kind of decide on these were the six that kind of encapsulates the village life?
I think just really naturally and over time and in conversations with people. And I think it's sort of where my head is anyway. I've talked a lot about universalities and what connects us. And, the way we live, the structures of our sort of psychological and emotional and physical needs are pretty similar. And, of course, how it's expressed and the historical ramifications are all different. But, there's so much about just the human experience and the human needs are universal. And so it just came through my travels, through observations, and then just really sitting down and thinking about what would make a community sustainable, what would make its people sort of set up for the best chance at life. And it really needs to come, because of course you sort of think, oh, well, we would need a school. Well, then what happens to that education? What happens to that training that you put in? Where do they go with it? And then you think, well, wouldn't it be great to have a space for enterprise? And then you think, well, what about mental health? And so it really cascades if you're really working with a people, and if you're committed in a holistic sense, which we were from the beginning.
Yeah, so those are the foundations that people can then build off of.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I like how you said sustainable, because at KIND we believe that sustainability is inevitably more than just looking after our planet. It's about caring for fragile social ecosystems, natural economies, and growing a culture of sustainability for humans that occupy the earth. And those three things are inseparable. And the Village Charity, of course, similarly strongly believes in cultivating the growth of people in place. But could you share maybe an example or a story that maybe stands out to you?
Yeah, there's many, and I think what I want to talk about is, going back to what I said about sort of changing the story, changing the narrative, and enabling people to have experiences or have connections that help them change that narrative. And so one of the things that we started doing, and we've sadly had to put it a little bit on hold for obvious reasons when I tell you what it is through COVID, but we're hoping to pick it up again. But one of the founding principles and initiatives that we had was this idea of working with the veteran community and repurposing the skills and in some ways sort of the character of a veteran, which is somebody who oftentimes wants to travel in a deep sense of service and frankly, being comfortable in physically uncomfortable situations, is working with the veteran community and repurposing their skills as acts of service in the world. And we worked with the UK ex-armed forces, but the vision pre-COVID was very much to expand that and work with anybody within reason. And so we had many rotations of veterans come to Lesotho, where they worked with herd boys, as they're called locally, essentially shepherds, doing upskill training and working in the school, and also just doing a lot of physical labor around infrastructure. And what was really important about that is the mutual exchange of information and the mutual sort of shared experience. They both could not be coming from more opposing life circumstances. And yet they were able, despite language barriers, they were able to have these shared experiences and a shared recognition in that they both, first of all, are men, generally speaking, and men who, although obviously not entirely, we had some great women with us, but there was something really fascinating about masculinity that came out, and about sort of the shepherds spent a very isolated life and sent away from the community. And then one of the things that is a real challenge is when they're their rotations, if you will, of looking after the animals, and how they integrate back into society. And of course, that's one of the challenges for the veteran community as well, as they go away and they have this very intense experience that is hard oftentimes to relate and translate back into community. And so that was something that they both were able to support each other with, and talk about and find this very unique way of looking at these experiences. And of course, there was also objective benefits of the veterans feeling that they could be of service, and the shepherds having this extraordinary opportunity to meet somebody that they never would have in a completely different walk of life, and the opportunity to upskill and to learn from them. And so but there was a really mutual exchange and a rapport that was built that was very much of the village and of what we are trying to achieve, that within the sort of objective realities of helping, the very basic things of, people need food, people need safety, people need all these things. But amongst that, there needs to always be this touchstone of what beyond that can we share, and where's the humanity, and where's the going back to what I've just said all along, going back to, where is the commonality and the recognition of each other, of ourselves in the other. And that's a perfect example, I think.
That's a great example. And resilience seems to kind of be woven through it. And that seems to be another important part of the village charity. And it's, of course, an important part of regenerative change, preservation of our world. But what does resilience mean to you? And what part has it played in your journey so far? And how do we push forward in the sustainability space? I think, remaining hopeful and resilient in the face of what often feels like, very damning space, and quite challenging as well.
Well, I mean, from the beginning, resilience, I've come from a pretty topsy-turvy upbringing. And so I think resilience was just something that I innately had to cultivate. And again, being sort of off the beaten path, and the choices that I made required resilience, required a sense of self and a sense of purpose that, was not always easy or straightforward or necessarily reflected anywhere. So finding that resilience was something that I had to, or have had to find for myself, at different times. And in terms of the relationship to the charity, it's certainly something that we sort of brought into our more everyday conversation through COVID, because, it's no secret that small businesses, small charities have struggled a lot. And of course, the sad irony of that is that the people that we're working with are, of course, precisely the time when they need the support. And so we really, the idea of resilience and our exploration of it has been this idea that, and what I have found to be true about resilience is I think we often think of resilience as sort of, triumphant, and here we go, and we are, fearless in the face of adversity. And what throughout COVID and drawing from my own experiences, what I really started to understand it as, it's the liminal space between knowing what's going to happen and it's still being able to sort of walk on that tightrope, if you will, and stick with the integrity of what you're trying to do. And I think that very much speaks to the space that we're in terms of the challenges that we're facing. I think that, it is dire and worrying, but we're still in that space of having to put one foot in front of the other, even though we're shaking and even though we don't know the outcome. And that's the resilience, taking another breath is the resilience. And if we knew how it would end up there, one wouldn't have the need for resilience. And I think with that said, I a full believer in optimism and what it is that propels one to take those next steps, because ultimately I think inspiration doesn't come from negative, dismal outlook. Inspiration comes from taking those steps forward regardless, and inspiration comes from the wins, and the small wins and the big wins, and it's an emotional story that we're telling, and we have to keep telling it. And I think that yeah, I've rambled, but I think resilience is really that space between where we are now and where we want to go, and being brave enough to get from point A to point B. And the point is that you're unsure.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I need to cut this section out and just put it on replay. No, that's great. And am I right in saying it's almost like having the faith and knowing that everything is going to be okay?
Yeah,
having that
and
trust
even
in
taking
yourself.
it one step forward is not necessarily having the faith, or not knowing everything is going to be okay, but having the faith anyway.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I want to talk a little bit about the social enterprise, Journey to the Village. Can you explain a little bit about how that came about and its connectivity with the Village charity?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go into it too much because we're very much in the development phases. But really, its roots come from all the things that I've been talking to you about, and all the different experiences and relationships I've been lucky enough to form over the years out in the world. But it really sort of took hold during the pandemic, and it became increasingly clear to me that now more than ever do we need a global village. Now more than ever are we completely undeniably faced with how interconnected we are. And in a way, interestingly, COVID was the first time in a long time, one could argue ever, that the world had a intense collective experience together. And so it's come out of that. And also working in the charity sector, the idea of sustainability, financial sustainability, really was something I was grappling with during the pandemic. And questions that I was having was, is the future really around for-purpose businesses?
Yeah.
And the idea of money and good work being exclusive. Well, of course they're not. And of course, money is something that enables and propels, and why should it be something that is, I don't know if this is strictly true, but what I'm wanting to say is sort of withheld for a group of people, and other people it's charitable. And so how do we create a circular economy that is both empowering, that both generates stories, that enables people to connect, and also in a meaningful, tangible, objective way, empower people to have better access to education, better access to health, and better access to their dreams, really importantly, better access to their ideas, And so what we're creating it's a digital platform, which allows for, I won't go into too much, but it's a digital platform which really asks the question of what can a marketplace be, and how can we go beyond this 2D transaction and take it one step further, or maybe 3 or 4 steps further, to something that is experience driven, that has storytelling at its heart, which has become commonplace in social media, of course, but less so in the marketplace landscape, but is also completely committed to sustainability in a way that a charity would be, and completely committed to people and planet in a way that is more commonly found, but it's becoming more common in the commercial landscape, which is great. And that really strives, and then the heart of its business plan is a circular economy that, in order to successfully exist, relies on people and planet doing well. and it's at the core of the stories that it's telling that generates the whole thing. And so that's what we're working on. And of course, that's a big vision, like everything I do, but or everything I dream up. But of course, it's made up of these small pieces. It's made up of individuals with stories and dreams and products and services to offer. And so it's really a compilation of sort of, I go back to that, maybe you can find who the quote's by and put it in the comments, but it's that quote that the universe is made up of stories, not atoms. And so it's really a compilation of individuals with stories and wisdom to share and products to share on one platform.
Sounds brilliant, and it really shows the power of community as well, coming together. And I did want to ask you, just for people who may be interested in going into entrepreneurship and perhaps even starting their own business, can you give us maybe kind of your experience from founding a charity to also now a social enterprise? I know you talked about maybe, is that the future of business? Is it kind of purpose-driven businesses, but was there kind of like a clear distinction between the two? Like, did you was there anything major that you felt like, oh wow, I wasn't prepared for this, or I didn't know that it was going to be this different, or maybe you did,
between the charity
kind of,
landscape and
and the social enterprise landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one is with charity people, there's a lot more opinions about what's appropriate.
Okay.
And risk-taking is rewarded in the business space, where risk-taking really isn't rewarded in the charitable space. And I think it's probably its biggest downfall, is that they're not necessarily run like businesses with the same commitment to sort of creativity and risk and to risk. And I think that in the charitable space, you have to be very careful about making a bold decision because the risk is high, and of course also the positive could be really high, but the risk is high, and people have given you money to do a charitable service, which they have their own definition of. Or they could have their own definition of, it's not necessarily, marketing isn't really looked on positively in the charity space, but of course, in order to tell the story and to raise more money,
marketing,
you need to market. But, we've definitely had people say, we did something around stories coming out of Lesotho, and we definitely had somebody get in touch and say, I don't think this is a good use of charitable funds. And the whole thing probably cost about 20 quid. But it's just really interesting. So just there's not an expectation for the same level of sort of boldness, which in the business space is expected. You have to have it. The very nature of business is to go big or go home and to be bold, especially in a tech landscape, especially in a forward futuristic space,
Right. I guess no, that's really interesting because I've never founded a charity, and I never thought about it in that way, around that boldness aspect. And I kind of had an idea around kind of being a bit more hesitant around how you spend your money, but yeah, no, that's really interesting. Something to keep in mind for anyone maybe listening who is interested in the two, both the social enterprise versus the charity.
And I think they can work really well. I mean, my expectation is they can work really well in tandem, because the business allows a level of sustainability the charity wouldn't have, and the charity allows a level of governance in terms of delivering its impact that is built into the concept and the structure of a charity, which isn't necessarily built into a business. And so I haven't fully tested it yet, but my expectation is that there can be a really positive relationship between what they each bring.
Oh, I'm excited to stay tuned. But what's next for the Village Charity? And are you looking for volunteers, funding? Are there any current projects you could share with us?
Yeah.
Perhaps projects that our listeners could even become involved with.
Absolutely. So we, as I was saying, COVID has really provided this opportunity, shall we call it, to reflect and to think about how we deliver and what's possible. And obviously we've had to review some of our, the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to do things like the veteran volunteer piece has been disrupted a lot of it. But so one of the questions that have found ourselves is accessing beneficiaries. How do we access our beneficiaries? Which frankly has always been a question, but I think it's made more prominent with the pandemic. So how do we literally physically get to beneficiaries in a very isolated time who are already isolated people? And one of the concepts that we came up with or my colleague came up with, was this idea of a mobile village. And so whether that's all 6 aspects of a village or just one, depending on the needs, sort of a mobile vehicle or a pop-up dynamic where you can come into the community and set up a shop. So for instance, one of the things that we're working on with Afghan refugees in the Midlands is a free shop. So we get a lot of donations, and this is a place where any viewer, any listeners, we're always looking for hygiene donations, food donations, educational donations, things like that. And what we're looking at doing is creating a free shop. So setting it up, having it be pulling on my theatrical background of having it being an immersive sort of experience for someone where it really feels like a shop, and people being able to come in and pick out what they need, and then obviously not have to pay for it, because one of those like simple dignities of life is being able to choose what you want.
Yeah.
And in so many spaces you'll get a handout of items, which in itself, you're sort of, it may not be what you really need or what you really want. And so this idea of a mobile concept, and so the other thing that we're developing is a mobile garden for urban communities in the Midlands. And so that being something that arrives and they can have access to any fresh produce that's produced, but also kids can get their hands dirty, can learn about the environment, and the parents can also have support and community brought to them as well. So it's really about adapting to the times and also adapting to what different communities might be needing. And obviously the scalability of that is pretty endless, where it can be a mobile school, it can be a mobile library, it can be a mobile sacred space where it's therapists having access, or meditation, or whatever it might be. So in terms of ways to get involved, as I said, we're always open to physical donations. Of course, we always need money to keep developing these projects. And then also skills, people with specific skills. We're all about collaborating and forming partnerships. And so, as I mentioned, therapists, meditation, sport is a big one that we're looking at getting into. I talked about the 6 pillars, but one of the things that we don't have is sort of a village pitch. And so bringing in sports practitioners, teachers, academics who want to tutor. We have so much access now with Zoom and connecting people. And so, and also, of course, media, that's something that we always need help with, is how to get our message out there and how to get our stories out there. And so if you have a skill that, you feel would be valuable to either us as an organization or to our beneficiaries, then that's also wonderful. It'd be something we'd love to take advantage of.
Oh, great. And how can people get in touch with you and support your mission?
Well, there's thevillagecharity.org. I think I try to stay off social media, but we have at the Village Charity, which is our Instagram. And then if anybody would like to get in touch with me, I think just emailing me, I'm open to that. And as I said, I I'm taking a social media hiatus, but so my email is dominique@thevillagecharity.org, which I'd be happy to hear from anybody.
That's great. And well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for
We're
having me.
ready for a quick fire round if
Oh,
you're
good.
ready.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do you define sustainability?
Oh, that little
Kind
simple
of
question.
yeah, it's a little bit of a big one, but
I think it's so. I guess I'm all about sort of what happens, like opposing forces sort of coming together, opposing ideas. Thinking about it, I think sustainability is this sort of tension between, now bear with me, tension between harmony and innovation. And I think that we think about sustainability, and what comes to my mind is sort of this utopia where humans and the environment and all humanity sort of lives in this space of harmony, and then, which is lovely, and that's something to strive for. And then there's this constant need to innovate, and I think that's so innate to humanity, but also innate to evolution, to life. There's this constant propelling us forward, this constant sort of learning of ourselves, of discovering new things and new possibilities of what sustainability even means. And so I think we need to cultivate a level of peace between ourselves and one another, but then constantly be pushing it forward, which I think is where, that dialogue and that argument is, of course there will be stumbling blocks, stumbles backwards, but it's in that push and pull that I think something of balance can eventually be found.
I really like that. That utopia does sound very nice. Hopefully we get there one day. And what are you most hopeful for?
I think that there's an acceleration of change that is happening on the planet right now that's really extraordinary. And a change in thinking, a change in how we relate to one another, a change in technology. And that makes me really hopeful. And I think COVID has been illuminating. And I think that it's really, to watch what's possible with change, that gives me a lot of hope and excitement, really.
And who inspires you?
I think I'm inspired by the people who, sort of the unsung heroes, the people who do the work, the people who have been doing the work quietly and steadfastly, is that a word? In a steadfast manner. I think we live in a very noisy world, and a world that's very quick to change, and quick to change its opinions, and quick to have what's on trend and what's trending on Twitter. And I'm really inspired by the people who, don't end up in Time magazine, and the people who are, who are doing what they can uniquely do well, and just doing, and committed to that path. Without necessarily, it's great that if they do get their stories told, because I'm all about stories, but who aren't necessarily getting the likes. That really inspires me. And, I'm thinking of someone we work with in Lesotho who every day she gets up and she does this work, and there's nobody suggesting, giving her a pat on the back, other than occasionally. Yeah. And that really inspires me.
Absolutely. Well, this conversation has just been so eye-opening, and I've loved this conversation, Dominique. Thank you so much for your time and sharing more about you and Journey to the Village and the Village Charity. I encourage everyone who's listening to join Dominique's community and get in touch with her, as she mentioned, if you have any skill sets or money even and want to contribute. So yeah, please do reach out and support the powerful work that she is and wants to carry out.
And just really quickly, I mean, thank you, Izzy, so much. And your work is so exciting to me to be witnessing. Just quickly in terms of other ways to help, and we are also looking at raising capital. And I think that's a very different for the journey to the village. And so I understand, I certainly understand there's a difference between a charitable donation, which has a relatively short lifespan, and a capital investment, which is a different proposition. And so, I'm really excited about the idea of talking to other female founders and opening up that conversation as well.
Absolutely. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. And for all the viewers, if you enjoyed this conversation with Dominique, please do like, subscribe, and share this conversation with more people in your community. We go live every Friday and look forward to having you join us next week. So thanks so much, everybody, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Bye.